With Jamaica's next general elections being constitutionally due in September 2025, the dynamics between the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party are taking center stage. Good evening and welcome to The Conversation. With us tonight is renowned pollster and political analyst Dr. Dan Anderson. We'll discuss leadership, trust, and the electoral landscape. Stay with us. Welcome to The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation, Dr. Anderson. How are you?
I am good. Thank you very much. Good to be on your program again.
It's awesome. So congratulations are in order. So I ensure that I started by saying Dr. Anderson.
Thank you very much. The university was kind to me, so I welcome that, and I'm really honored by what they've conferred on me recently.
Recognition of all that many years, decades of hard work.
It is decades.
Awesome. So allow us to get some context in the recently concluded Dan Anderson poll that was done between September and October. What were some of the questions that you would have looked at so that would be able to inform how we move forward in the discussion this evening?
As usual, when we do a poll with a questionnaire, which is about 10, 15 questions long, we start from the general and then get to the specific, by which I mean we talk to people about what are the challenges that they're currently facing, what are the big problems that they identify in the country that needs to be addressed at this point in time. Then we look at how the leaders are actually regarded. What's the favorability rating for the respective leaders? What about the respective parties? Then we ask people how are they likely to turn out to vote? And if they are, how are they likely to vote and the reasons why? So general to the specific.
So with that said now, if I wanted to get an understanding as to what would be some of the factors that are driving the expectation, say, of such a close contest between both political parties, where would that fall? Well,
maybe I should address the issue of the closeness of the race at this point in time, because until February of 2024, it was close.
Yes.
I think what we have found since April, when we did the next poll, April 2024, following the local government elections, which, you know, both parties claim victory.
Yes.
You can't get any closer than that.
But one party had the popular votes.
Exactly. When we published the poll in February, just about a week or two before the local government elections, the Jamaica Labour Party had a 1 percentage point lead, which is coming from a situation where between 2018 and 2023, there was no poll that we conducted that had the People's National Party within striking distance.
Yeah.
They were as far as 16 percentage points behind at one stage. So when we got to 2023, that gap narrowed. And when we did the poll in February of 2024, the Jamaica Labour Party's lead had been cut to 1 percentage point. Now you can't get any closer than that. That's what we predicted. That's what we had 2 weeks before the February local government elections. What was the result of those elections? One party claimed the popular vote.
Yes.
One party claimed the popular number of divisions and councils. So, in essence, that 1 percentage point was vindicated by the results of the February elections. Now, since then, and I'm just addressing this issue of the closeness that you spoke to, since then the People's National Party went ahead by 7 percentage points in the poll we did 2 months after the local government, and when we did the one in September, there were 9 percentage points ahead. So at this point, it is not a close race. The Jamaica Labour Party has some gap to catch up with, so some gap to narrow down before we can call it a close race.
But in the normal scheme of things, would that 9 percentage point be something that they should be worried about, so to speak?
Oh, obviously, any party that's trailing by 9 percentage points should be worried.
So it's outside of the margin of error. What's the margin of error this time?
Plus or minus 3 percentage points. We work to that margin of error consistently so that we can compare the trend that we're picking up in respective polls. So when you are 5 percentage points out and 7 percentage points out and 9 percentage points out, it is cause for concern. Obviously, as you go closer to the election date, and we have another 9 months before we get to the constitutionally due elections of 2025, a lot of action, a lot of eyes will be on that gap, and obviously, you know, both parties will be striving. We've already seen the campaign, firing up in sort of earnest, and I believe that come January, we will see an intensification of that campaign because nobody knows when the election is going to be called, except one
Except
person.
for the Prime Minister.
Except for the Prime Minister.
So now, how does the JLP's quest for a third term, how might that influence voter sentiment and opposition strategy?
I believe that, it is going to be a significant factor in all of this because I'd imagine that both parties would have data available to them to see exactly what needs to be done, what are the pressure points that they would need to kind of push buttons for, what they need to do in order to attract more voters to themselves. But I make the point consistently that poll data is an indicative of how people are likely to vote. But, until the campaign starts in earnest and whatever messages that might be enunciated by respective parties will then serve to win people either over or consolidate. And therefore, elections are won on election day.
So would you say then that the polling data, it suggests a significant shift in terms of voter loyalty, or is it more a reflection of leadership perceptions?
It's a combination of both, really. And I make the point that, and it's a very important point to note that between 2011 and 2020, 2011 election when the PNP went into that election and won 42-21, and 2020 when they went into that election and lost 14-49. Between those 2 years, the People's National Party, and I use the word advisedly, lost 174,000 voters.
174.
In other words, 174,000 voters migrated from the PNP between 2011 and 2020. So 174,000 people fewer voted for the PNP in 2020 than voted for them in 2011. And that's an important factor. But even more important to note is that over the same period, the JLP's support in terms of numbers of voters who turned out increased by 4,000. All right? So despite
that's a difference of 170,000.
Right. Despite the fact that they won 42-21 with 400 and odd thousand voters, by the time people voted in 2020, that PNP support had dwindled to 300 and about 20 or thereabout. But the JLP support only grew by 4,000. Wow. So what the inference, the obvious inference from that is that there's a significant fallout of the People's National Party between 2011 and 2020. I remember gleaning an article, and I'm sorry to mention another media house here, but in an article that I wrote for one newspaper company, I said the PNP is in a free fall without a parachute in 2020 because the numbers were falling dramatically by virtue of the loss in 2016 and the significant infighting that took place between 2016 and 2020. They lost all of that support. So what is happening, and you ask about the dynamics, what is happening now is that we're picking up information that they have been able to regain some of that 170,000 that they lost between 2011 and 2020, which is what has been shoring up their support over the last 2 polls or 4 polls that we have done between 2023 and 2024.
So it's a matter of supporters finding their way back.
They've been able to attract, reattract some of the lost support from that time.
And your data seem to be showing, because we can see where the Prime Minister's unfavorability ratings have gone to approximately 40%, whereas the opposition leaders is roughly 26%. So how could the opposition leader capitalize on his low unfavorable rating to sway the undecided voters now?
I think we have to look at the history of the favorability rating. When we look at when Peter Phillips was leader of the People's National Party, his favorability rating never got above 15 percentage points. Consistently, we had Holness as leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, Prime Minister. His favorability rating was in the 40s, whereas Peter Phillips as leader of the opposition was 15, thereabout.
Teens.
So we had some tumultuous elections amongst the PNP, which eventually led to the election of Mark Golding as leader of the PNP. And when we started to track Mark Golding's favorability rating, it was not better than Peter Phillips's, 15, 16, that type of thing. But as the years went by about 2022, we saw that favorability rating getting higher and higher. All right, so what we saw in the last poll round about February of 2024 was that the lines were about to cross, whereas Holness's favorability rating fell below that 40 percentage point.
Yes.
And Golden's favorability rating began to get up in the 20s, high 20s, and so on. So at the point in time, we can say that there is not much to choose between the favorability and non-favorability rating of the PNP leader and the JLP leader. We have the data from the latest poll that we have, which I'll share with you.
Oh, okay. So, well, we can see that over time, voter apathy has played its part. We can look at the 174,000 persons who decided against voting for that particular time. But when we come back from the break, we want to find out, because we see that the voter apathy issue is not just local, it's not just regional, it's worldwide. So we want to talk a little bit about the fatigue with the incumbency that's there. We just want to remind you that you are watching The Conversation, and I'm speaking with Dr. Don Anderson, where we're looking at the recently published polls. Continue to stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to The Conversation. So just before the break, we started looking at voter fatigue and with the incumbency. And one of the questions that I've always had to ask was, so the data seem to be saying, or it can be skewed in a particular direction where one can assume that fewer persons are actually voting. But I want to find out from you, the pollster, if it's a case whereby in terms of percentage, you have fewer persons, or in terms of actual numbers. How how should we understand the voter apathy?
Okay, first of all, as the electoral office will confirm, there's a very high level of voter registration. People are registering to vote, and they're getting their voter ID card.
So more persons are signing up to vote.
More persons are signing up to vote now. The actual voter registration number, I think, is now topping 2 million, thereabouts, all right? But what you're finding is that a lot of persons are actually registering to vote because they get an ID card, which entitles them to use it at different places to, identify themselves. But they're not using it to vote. So the gap between persons who are turning out to vote vis-a-vis those who are being registered to vote is now reflecting in a low percentage voter turnout.
So is that gap narrowing any at all? As in,
the voter turnout by virtue of by virtue of the very numbers I gave you a while ago, a high registration, a low turnout represents a low percentage turnout every time. So when in the local government elections, we had 20-odd%.
So therefore, no, the whole assumption of voter apathy being at an all-time high, we can use this to argue that statement then.
Question is whether, I think it's voter apathy. There's a debate as to whether it's apathy or what. But we have a number of factors that we have identified as the reasons why people don't go to vote. And to a large extent, it's apathetic because people, it's a turn-off. Young people are not engaged in the process. And if you talk to anywhere between a 16 to 18-year-old, they don't want to have any conversation about politics with you. It's not in their language.
Yeah.
All right? Then we're finding that those who have voted in the past are now saying, what's the point of voting again? I've voted in the past, my whole lot has not changed in life. Why am I going out to vote? Also, I've benefited not at all from any of the two political parties. None of the two parties any better. Politics is corrupt. And these are the reasons people are now advancing for not going out to vote. So there's a growing incidence of that.
So my assumption now is that there is unlikely to be a repeat of any party holding on to power for 18 years. It's highly unlikely, at least in my mind, but I don't have the data. So I'm wondering now if it's a case whereby voter fatigue might become now what you call a decisive factor in this upcoming election, whenever it's called, or does the economic stability that we have seen under the Jamaica Labour Party mitigate against this risk?
I think you're going to see, we've seen the pattern, a continuation of that voter apathy. We haven't seen anything in data that we have generated this year that has indicated to us that people are going to be necessarily turned on more to the political process. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a continuation, probably a building up of that resistance to going out to vote because they just don't see the benefit in doing so. And as I indicated, young people aren't being brought into the process to compensate for those who are falling out. So you may very well see a continuation of that voter apathy. Now, the extent to which political parties are able to garner that kind of support would be dependent on the messages that they carry, how convinced people are that they're serious about it, how convinced people are that they're genuine about the interest of the people. And so far, we haven't seen a breakthrough in terms of that kind of communication, but we don't know what this campaign will hold.
So does the respective leadership styles, though, would those resonate with their particular bases and the wider electorate, you think?
You know, what we're finding is that, say, in the era of a P.J. Patterson, for example, and a Portia Simpson-Miller, we found that the party support was very leader-centric.
Yeah.
In other words, they were driven by the popularity of a Portia who, you know, kissed everybody everywhere she went, kind of stuff, and that was a very positive factor for her. A P.J. Patterson had his own kind of charisma. That era of leadership was characterized by people being driven by what the leaders were like, who the leaders were, the kind of personalities of the leaders. We're finding more and more and more, and Andrew Holness had that at a certain point in time.
Yeah.
When he became leader, he had a very good, strong young people following because of, you know, how he dressed and how he carried himself compared to Peter Phillips, for example. We're finding that more and more, very slowly, the voting public is becoming a little bit more issues-focused and less leader-centric, all right? And therefore, with the passage of time, over the last 2 years that we've been looking at the favorability rating of the respective leaders, we have found the gap between a Holness at 40-odd% and a Golden at 19% is narrowing. And now we have them almost neck and neck in terms of favorability rating.
Yeah.
So whether or not the leader factor is going to play an important role and be a dynamic driver in the coming elections is yet to be seen.
So then the issue, because we recognize, and I could pull from some of what you have said, there has been a change globally. There's been a shift. A number of global external factors are there. So economical shifts we're talking about. How have some of those things helped to shift voter priorities, and how might that affect them in the later elections?
Difficult to say. I think when you look at the macro picture in Jamaica, for example, when you look around at the construction which is taking place and big buildings which are going up, when you look at the international agencies, they're saying, boy, the macro picture looks very good. And I think we all have to agree that. I think what we're picking up from studies that we have done for the Chamber of Commerce, we've been doing the Business and Consumer Confidence Survey over the last 23 years, consistently, every day for the last 23 years. So we have now close to 100 quarters of data on that. What we're picking up recently, in line with that kind of obviously visible macro picture which the international agencies are talking to, we're picking up that a lot of the consumers aren't seeing the trickle-down effect from that they would like to see. And as a result, when we look at the confidence level of consumers over the last 3 quarters in 2024, for example, it's almost flat. It's almost flat. They're saying, yeah, we're seeing all of these things taking place around us, but we're not quite seeing the benefit accruing to us to the extent that we would think it should. And the consumers are therefore saying consumer confidence is flat. Business confidence is flat.
So from what, again, we're pulling from what you have just said. We see where it would give the impression that the Jamaica Labour Party has delivered notable economic achievements, yet there's a perception that they have failed to communicate this. You know, why is that, and how might they address it? I'm not sure what the data might have shared.
Communication is the key factor, because I think people see the big buildings that are taking place, and you know, the almost transformation of the city and some of the main towns. It's not a question of communication, because I think that obvious benefit is realized. What they're saying is that the actual the actual trickle-down effect into my pocket is not taking place to the extent that I would like. And that's really where it matters, you see? That's really where it matters. So obviously this is something that they would have to address.
So therefore then economic stability alone cannot secure another term for the Jamaica Labour
Economic
Party.
stability, which doesn't translate into money in people's pockets, is an important factor. Now I need to bring to your attention something else, because over the last couple of years, I mean, we've been tracking remittances, for example, for the last 14 years in that same business and consumer confidence.
Yes.
And we've seen where remittances were being received by 38% of the households up to 2020. Then COVID hit. And the inflow of remittances to households now is down to about 28%. Now, what's the importance of that? When we look at remittances and what percentage of people and how they use remittances are used by the people in the lower, middle, and lower income to address their daily household needs, largely. Now, when you have a fall off in remittances at the same time that the trickle-down effect is not taking place to the extent that they would like, obviously you have a situation where people are beginning to question what they should do in an election.
So it demands a lot more based on what you're saying. But tell us a little bit more, though, about that. So the trickle-down effect and the effects on remittance, because we see remittance is clearly an external factor. So something outside. And I remember one of the conversations that we've been having before, that beryl. We looked at beryl and we see where the prices of a number of things have skyrocketed. You think that might have played into the position that we're in now? What's the data telling you about that?
I think what it has done is accelerate the kind of considerations of deprivation, for want of a better word, because at the same time that business and consumer confidence has been flat for 2024, actually in the last quarter, consumer confidence fell narrowly, so did business confidence. What it means is that forecasting, when they look down the road to what the economy is likely to be like, consumers are very skeptical. The business sector is also skeptical about the future, but the business sector is more long-term. They're more visionaries down the road. They're thinking they're here for the long haul, and therefore they're saying, yeah, things aren't great now, but we are resilient and we are going to stick it out and we're going to obviously turn the corner. Consumers are looking at it from in front of their faces and say, tomorrow when I go into the supermarket, I can't buy any bread. What will this be? You see? So and the consumers are who business people vote, of course. We're all voters. But the general public...
Perspectives are different.
A little different. The general public is saying, and what's the importance of the remittances? I make the point that over 58% of the persons who get remittances use it to shore up their daily household expenditure. So when remittances fall, they don't have that cushion to fall back on to the extent. All right? So at the same time that the economy is looking a little bleak as far as they're concerned, because when we look at the business and consumer confidence survey, there's a considerable degree of skepticism that the economy will improve in the next 24 months amongst the general consumer based on what is happening to them. All right? So when you have a situation where remittances are now less than it used to be, fewer households are receiving, then comes beryl. Because one of the questions that we asked in the business and consumer survey, and we make the point that this is a study we've been doing for the last 24 years consistently, every single day. When we look at the impact of beryl, and we ask people how are prices compared to last year, over 90% of the persons that we interview say prices have gone up significantly. So this is another factor, which is, and I made a point during the break that beryl came at the wrong time, and there's no right time for a storm, but at the same time that people are having a little bit of concern about where the economy is going and what's happening to their own pockets, here comes beryl to make the situation even worse. So I made a point at the talk I gave the other day that the economy is going into headwinds in 2025 by virtue of the third quarter data, which we have, which says confidence is down, prices are up, and people are feeling the pinch. So headwinds going into 2025, which just happens to be an election year.
Wow. All right, continue to hold that thought. We just want to remind you that you're watching The Conversation, where I'm speaking with renowned pollster and political analyst, Dr. Don Anderson. Continue to stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. welcome back to the conversation. So, based on what we have been discussing, a whole heap of things are coming now. We're going into 2025, which happens to be an election year. Globally, Jamaica seems to be steering directly into some headwinds. Consumer confidence is low, business confidence is low. So if we toss that aside now, when we look at the idea of youth discontentment and engagement, what are some of those specific concerns that you think might be driving youth discontent, and how critical is this particular demographic in shaping election results?
All right, so let me just make a quick correction. Business confidence is lower than it was last year. Consumer confidence is lower than it was earlier in the year. But it's not that confidence is necessarily low.
It's not where you want it to be.
It's not where you want to be.
Yeah.
And it is not back to where it was pre-COVID. It was getting there. 2023, we saw confidence getting back to levels that were close to pre-COVID levels, which was all-time high. 2019, 2020 was an all-time high for business and consumer confidence. COVID hit, so that took the belly out of the situation. We saw the numbers coming back. And 2024, the beginning of 2024, last quarter of 2023, we saw confidence levels closely approximating what it was prior to COVID. What we've seen in the last 2 quarters of 2024, which was the second quarter and the third quarter ending in October, was that confidence kind of at a standstill and dipped a little bit for both business and consumer. I wouldn't say confidence is low. It was lower than it was earlier in the year. All right? So we just need to make note of that particular point. That it's not that business confidence is low. Over 50% of the businesses still believe that's a good time to invest.
Yeah.
But that's lower than it was last year. All right, so it's an important point to make. It's all a relative factor. So over 50% of the businesses still believe it's a good time to invest, lower than it was earlier, where we had over 60-odd%. It was a very bullish environment. Over 60% felt it was a good time to invest.
So no, can we argue that we're in what you call a cost of living crisis?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've been looking at some market products with, I don't know how true this is, but I guess, you know, at a time when last year you could get sorrel at decent prices, sorrel is about $700 a pound. All right, I hear tomatoes are going at $1,000 a piece. I hear that, you know, sweet pepper is $800 a piece.
And ripe banana is $1,800 per dozen.
Exactly. So you are getting to a point where consumers, who generally are the people who are engaged in products like these, are feeling the pinch. There's no question about it.
So then...
Beryl, of course, has been a major factor in that.
Yes. So can the JLP's economic track record counteract voter frustrations over rising cost of living? You think that's possible at all in this coming election?
I don't know what they have, what any of the two parties have up their sleeve in terms of making a change in that. But the reality is that if you can't get bananas, the prices are going to be high. So it's a question of supply and demand. And I don't know to what extent short-term measures are being put in place to mitigate against that. But the bottom line is that agricultural products are short, in short supply. And as a result, prices are high, you know? So that's a factor. And I mean, you can't turn that over in a short possible time, in a short time. So I don't know what are the strategies that are going to be put in place to mitigate against that. But it's a factor. People are talking about the high cost of living. That's obviously an important factor. But the most important factor that people think needs to be addressed right now is crime and violence.
Yes.
Both business and non-consumers. All right?
So you're saying that crime and violence is something a little higher on the agenda? No,
it is.
Okay. So in terms of the allegations, though, the allegations of corruptions, how would those things weigh on voter confidence, and what can both parties or either parties do to rebuild trust?
I don't know. I'm going to say that we did a number of surveys in 2019. 2019, we did for the Ministry of National Security, we did one for National Integrity Action, and we did one for Corruption International out of Europe somewhere. All three of them were reported on within a short space of time. And if you ask me what was the one thread that came out of all of that, that a significant percentage of the Jamaican public believes that corruption is a way of life.
It's endemic.
Yeah, all right. So I don't know the extent to which you can change that perception overnight. By what means you can do it, I don't know, but it is important to note that this is how people feel. And not that they are necessarily involved in corruption themselves, but the fact of the matter is the perception that corruption has become a way of life in this country.
So do you think then that the perception of this particular kind of corruption, could that become the Achilles heel for the Jamaica Labour Party in this coming election?
I don't know. I can't say because obviously I don't have the data to speak to that particular factor. But in both the business sector and the consumer sector, when we ask them, what is the one major problem that you believe we're faced with as a country now that should be dealt with right away? And they say crime and violence. Of course, there are things like roads and water and housing and that type of thing, and cost of living, clearly. But both of them identify crime and violence as a major source which needs to be addressed. And so we know that security forces are working on that factor.
Yeah, so tell me now, in terms of, we look at the opposition leader, Mark Golding's image, and the question now is, how significant is his image of integrity in position the PNP as a viable alternative now to the current government? Do you think that?
A lot depends on how much importance they put on the whole question of integrity.
And then do you think that a focus on trustworthiness alone be enough to sway voters in favor of Golding?
I think, what people want is to stay here, money jingling in their pockets, to be able to have jobs that are long-term and sustainable. I think that's really what's important. As the data from and I introduced the whole question of the corruption incidents in the country to say that it doesn't seem to be a big issue amongst a large number of people. Even if it is, they seem to have accepted it as a way of life. So I don't know, the extent to which.
So in other words, then, the controversies that currently surrounds the Prime Minister, they might not influence voter decisions greatly. They will, but they might not.
We have no data at all because we have deliberately stayed away from introducing any question about integrity in any of the polls that we have done because the topic is something that's very much in the air and at legal stages. So we have not included any question about the integrity of any of the two leaders. We've asked about the performance, which is a different thing from integrity altogether. So, we can talk in terms of what people say as the performance rating of the two leaders, all right?
Yes.
And the favorability rating, which are the normal questions that we have tracked over the years. But we haven't dealt at all with the whole question of the integrity of anybody.
So we are now in the era of what you might call digital politics, all right? How effective do you think that grassroots campaigning would be in this particular era, going out on the ground and doing all those things? How effective do you think that might be for either of the parties?
Very, very important. I remember being asked, I do a lot of political polling in the region. I was in one of the Caribbean countries, and one of the leaders asked me if I could address his candidates because I was doing a fair amount of polling for them and I was meeting the candidates for the first time. So maybe 2 weeks before the election, I asked if I could meet with the candidates and share what we've been finding. And what was amazing to me was that half of the candidates didn't have a good awareness level.
Unpack that
for you. One of the candidates, for example, when we asked the people in our constituency, how aware are you of this particular individual? Only 50% of them said they knew her. And I made a point then that awareness doesn't necessarily translate to votes. But lack of awareness does translate to no votes.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're not out there pressing flesh, meeting the people, getting the people to know you, being present, etc., it's unlikely you're going to get support. So to answer your question, it is important, pressing the flesh and being visible. Because when we ask people about performance of members of parliament,
look at visibility.
Yeah. And we ask, and you get a low rating. We say, why do you rate this person so low? Well, I don't see him at all until when election time, or her, until election time. So visibility is important.
So visibility is more important than the actual work? Or?
No, I'm not saying so. And I can't tell you what is the ranking of each of these variables, but visibility is important.
Yeah.
If you're not there and if people don't know who you are, what kind of personality you are, you're not likely to get the vote. So definitely, I believe on-the-ground campaigning is going to be absolutely critical. They call it canvassing. I don't know exactly what canvassing is. I know that getting to meet people and getting them to understand what you're delivering or what you say you're going to deliver is a very important factor in election campaigning.
All right, so hold that thought. We just want to remind you that you're watching The Conversation, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to The Conversation. I'm speaking with a renowned pollster and political analyst, Dr. Dan Anderson. So we started looking at just grassroots campaigning, but now voter turnout expectation. You know, we want to look at the role that younger voters and the potential shift in traditional voting patterns. What does that look like? So younger voters are seen as key to the election. All right, so what are some of the trends that are emerging in terms of their political engagement?
You know, I've always been concerned about the level of engagement or potential engagement of persons 16 to 18 with the political process. They're detached. Or I should say they're not attached.
They're unattached.
Yeah. I mean, maybe about 10 years ago, it bothered me to the extent that I said, you know, I'm going to look at 16 to 18-year-olds and talk to a number of them. So we did a subsample of 16 to 18-year-olds, 15 to 17-year-olds to say, okay, politics, you know, what does it mean to you? And we were astounded by the level of disinterest among 15 to 17-year-olds who are your next set of voters, potential voters. We were astounded by the level of unattachment, for whatever better word, because they just didn't have any interest in political process. And why? They've grown up in an environment where, as far as they're concerned, politics is a dirty word, all right? And from that perspective, they have attempted to stay far. There are those who have been personally engaged, and obviously we have youth parliament and so on, so it's not a lost cause. But the incidence of young people who are really seriously engaged in the political process is low, all right? What we have found over the last 4 years of polling is that whereas in the 2020 polling that we did, 2019-2020 polling that we did, there was a very strong support, even amongst the relatively few young people who were interested. There was a very strong level of support for Andrew Holness. He identified with the young persons, and therefore when we looked at likely voting intention amongst the young persons, more of them were inclined to vote for the Jamaica Labour Party. More of them were keen on, you know, aligning themselves with the Jamaica Labour Party. But the young people have always been the category amongst the various age cohorts that are least likely to vote. So when you look at...
So the intentions are there.
When you look at the age cohorts, the people who are more than likely prepared to turn out are the older people. They've been voting. They're going to vote again unless they are turned off by the process and not benefiting. But the incidence of voting amongst the older persons is significantly higher than the incidence of voting amongst the younger persons. All right? And amongst the younger persons who said they're going to vote, there was a pretty strong support for Andrew Holness. He identified more with them, and clearly because Peter Phillips wasn't able to identify with the young people. We're finding that in the late 22 and early 23 poll that we've been doing, because every poll that we do, we analyze by 6 different age groups, 18 to 24, 25, 34, 35, 44, 45, 54, up to over 65. What we're finding is that the number of young persons who are identifying with the golden type leadership is growing. So that there is now a pretty competitive situation amongst the young voters, bearing in mind that the young voters are the ones least likely to go out to vote. But even amongst that category, there has been a growing degree of connection between Mark Golden
and the younger ones.
But
is there any disconnection, though, with the older cohorts, as well, with either Mark Golden or with Prime Minister Holness?
We've found the People's National Party has already had a pretty strong core support amongst the 55 plus.
Yes.
That remains.
Okay.
So in a way, if you wish, what the contest is about is that in that age group,
they're growing.
25 to 45, 55.
They're growing.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
So So pretty much then, you think that a significant youth turnout, you think that might stand to, well, in this day and age, you think that would stand to change traditional voting patterns, though, you think?
Well, I don't see a significant young people turnout.
Any at all?
I don't see it in the next election coming up because the pattern is that they are still the ones that are least likely to turn out to vote. But I think, and I'm not quite sure what each of the parties is doing to engage the young people. I'm not quite sure. Haven't quite seen it. But obviously, you know, it would be an important factor because every vote counts, eh? And if somewhere along the line one of them could appeal to the young people, it would obviously bring more people into the fold. But I'm not sure yet that there is a driver or any of them has identified a driver that would pull the young people in great numbers to go out to vote.
So we understand that that particular cohort is unattached, but I'm reflecting now on the section where we spoke about remittance and the remittance falling to more than 10 by more than 10 percentage points. Does that also translate to diaspora engagement now? Is there a reduction in the extent of engagement between locals and the diaspora?
I don't think so. I don't think so. The diaspora would love to play a much greater part, from what I'm understanding. You know, I don't think that that's a low engagement. It's just the reality of the situation. COVID hit everybody, and the sources from which remittances have come generally in the United States, Canada, etc., and they were impacted by COVID. So that is one of the reasons for the fall off in the remittances to Jamaica. It just simply means that more and more of the people who are more impacted by challenges of price increases are going to be impacted by the fall off in remittances. And that's one of the factors that's actually generating this level of discontent amongst the general public.
So now I'm thinking about funding. I'm thinking about funding, and I'm thinking, how significant would the role of the diaspora be in terms of shaping that narrative around funding and so on in this particular election?
I don't know, to be honest, because the diaspora has there have been a number of kind of inter what do you want to call it? I don't know if the groups within the diaspora that have actually been rivaling each other to an extent. I don't know, but the diaspora wants to play a bigger role in elections. I don't know exactly what role they want to play, but I think they would love to be able to help shape more of the policies that are being things. But the extent to which trust would be a factor is really one of the key issues.
All right, so we can talk about disruption now, because we're moving where we're seeing a lot of splintering, sometimes persons falling out, and we have seen in the past where, you know, you'd have fallen out between members of the major political parties who would have gone on to form their own parties. We see that in the National Democratic Movement. But now there's a United Independence Congress, and there are also other splinters that are coming, persons who are going about it independently. How could smaller parties or coalition politics disrupt traditional two-party dominance in this coming election?
Not in the foreseeable future. Not in the foreseeable future. We have data now.
Add some context to that.
I only speak from data.
Yes.
Put it that way. My opinions don't count. I speak from data. And in the most recent poll we did, there's a question that we asked. Said, effectively or essentially, how important is that third party in our context? And very few people, single digits, felt that it has a role to play. You know, very few. We've been dominated to a certain extent by the two-party issue. The NDM, obviously, in the '97 election came closest to disrupting the process, but they fell away. And they've been the only substantial third party in recent times. Substantial because they did, in fact, attract quite a few votes.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a space for them, though?
Not in the minds of our current voters, despite the disaffection with the two.
So I'm not comfortable with either of these two, but I don't want a third one. That's pretty much what the data is showing.
2% of the people that we interviewed said they would vote for a third party.
2%?
2%. All right? So there's really not enough space. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that you have to look at the perception that has been created by third parties coming. So we're going to contest an election and nobody turns up. going to contest an election and few turn up. The fact of the matter is that the general voting public is probably asking itself, how serious are these third parties? Are they really serious? Can they make a difference? Can they do differently from what the two existing parties are doing? And there is no really serious conviction that they can. This is data.
That's what the data is saying.
That's what the data is saying.
Wow. All right. So before we skip to the end, though, we just saw a local government election to some extent. And what role would you say, based on your data, what role would those kinds of elections play in setting the tone for the general election? I mean, it's obvious, but...
A big part. The data, I made reference off here to the pattern of political polling that we have done over the last 8 years. We have been polling since 1989. But over the last 8 years, from the 2016 election, where the Jamaica Labour Party won by, a split decision in boxing, they would say. Between 2018 and 2022, there was no poll that we did that had the People's National Party less than 10 percentage points behind. All right? So if you look at that trend from 2018 to 2024, you will see in the middle of it, that green line all the way up the top, and the orange line 10, 12 percentage points on average behind for the last 6 years. We come to 2023, a number of factors, not the least of which was the salary issue, which went for a lot of people went sour when the government granted itself and the opposition politicians increases at the same time that they said to public sector, we can't do anything for you more than what we can do for you, kind of stuff. That didn't go down well. And there are a number of other factors between 2023 to now which have cut into the kind of support that the Jamaica Labour Party had. Right? So by the time we got to 2024 February, we could see the narrowing of that gap from that gulf between the JLP all the way up here, minimum of 10 percentage points ahead of the PNP in 8 polls that we did, to a situation 2023 where the gap was beginning to narrow, crossed here and there, the February elections. And by the February elections, I made a point earlier,
1%.
PNP was 1 percentage point behind the Jamaica Labour Party. So the February elections was a shocker for many. Shocker for many because the PNP won the popular support. JLP won more councils. But for a couple of weeks after that, the debate was, the mood was, who won the election?
Yeah.
All right? Those elections were very decisive because when we did the next poll in April, the pattern of narrowing from that huge gulf between the JLP at the top and the PNP 12 percentage points behind. Switched. All right? Switched. So when we did the poll in April, the PNP was 7 percentage points ahead.
And no.
9 percentage points ahead.
So that's a 10% gain.
So we're saying those February elections were pivotal.
So I know that we're not in the habit of calling, but based on what the data is saying, could the inference be made? Should the Jamaica Labour Party call the election early to preempt the PNP from gaining momentum? Because that's what's happening now.
I gave a talk at a function the other night, and I threw it out to the audience. What would you do in that situation?
Yeah,
because the gap widened between, but a lot depends on what they have in store to correct that. A lot would depend on that because obviously, the fact of the matter is, that they try to discredit the poll data, the pollsters, in the hope that if they discredit the pollster, the data will look differently. I've never seen any election anywhere where you decry the pollster and it makes a difference to how people vote. So
you're not questioning the data, you're questioning the pollster as a poll.
Yeah, and I've been in the business long enough to wear that on my shoulder.
Could we call that desperation, though?
I don't know if it's desperation, but it's a thought that if they could convince people that the data is not correct, then it would make a difference. That doesn't work on the ground. On the ground is who actually gets the people out to vote. All right, so I can understand the strategy, but I haven't seen anywhere where that strategy has worked. that if you discredit the pollster, the data going to look different. The data is the data is the data. I report on what I find, and I reported more often for the JLP leading than for the PNP leading. So it's uncanny that.
Yes.
But the bottom line is that the February elections were pivotal because it was a shocker for many, because a lot didn't believe that this popular support would come out in favor of the PNP against the background of the beatings that they have had in the political polls over the 8 years, from 2016 to 2024.
You think they might have squandered that lead, though, as in they did not do what they ought to have done, primarily in the way of communicating their successes, and separate from the fact that we have clearly had some external factors that have affected them. Do you think that there's more that they could have done in the way of communicating and to ensure that...
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because there's a widely held view that the public relations arm of the JLP is strong. So if you think that I haven't communicated it well, I would be at a loss to
No, I'm just checking if the data would have shared, would have inferred anything like that.
Yeah, because there's a pretty strong feeling that they have a pretty good PR arm. So you need to examine, and we probably will do something at a point in time to see, well, what are the factors that have led to an obviously closing of that gap between the JLP at the top and the PNP down the bottom to a point where the PNP, what are the factors that have conditioned that? And we have a fair amount of data which speaks to it, but I think we'd like to be able to organize it in a better way to be able to represent it.
All right, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing that. Dr. Dan Anderson, thank you very much for taking the time to come and have this conversation with me. And on behalf of the entire Scene TV production team, thank you for watching the conversation, and stay tuned as we continue to analyze issues that matter most to Jamaica and the Caribbean. See you next time.